It's very difficult, isn't it? Coming forth, I always think, with these sorts of things, because one, I know very little about the industry, and two, quite a lot of what I might say has already been said, but I'm going to give it a go to develop one or two points and ideas. And the first one really is to congratulate Helen, like everybody else, on the book, because as academics, by the time the book comes out, we've moved on, and we never stop and kind of celebrate our individual achievements. And I think it's really important to do that. And in a sense, this is a celebration not only just of this book, but also of CERC and of the doctoral students and researchers that have been generated by CERC and their ongoing work in this actually vital field. And so that's really the first point. The other thing I'd like to say is that for me, I've got this deep concern about the nature of my own subject, about, if you think about industrial sociology, how much of it now is book-based and based upon conceptual ideas where nobody actually goes out and really finds out what's going on in the workplace. And here we have a book that involves very in-depth work in very difficult conditions that really tries to bring to life the actual experiences of these seafarers. And I must say, I really like books with pictures. And I've kind of come to this rather late. And now, especially with the kind of iPhones and what have you, it's actually much easier. And over the last few years on my research trips, I've been taking more photographs. I'm not sure I'm going to get them in a book, but nevertheless, I think that this is really, really helpful to bring some of this alive. And the first picture in Helen's book is one of a gangway leading up on board. And for most of us in social sciences, problems of access are to do with picking up a phone and saying, can I come and interview you? But for Helen, it was, how do I walk up this, looking brave, to spend 42 days, or whatever it was, with this, in this total institution, as Steve mentioned, to do my research, a completely different sort of kind of a research experience, and one for which Helen deserves a huge amount of credit. In terms of the relevance to the school, well, I don't really need to spend much time talking about this. I mean, the question of globalization and the future of work is absolutely dominant to our interests. I mean, you can't really understand the future of work unless you understand it within its local, national, and it's also its global context. And globalization is impacting so much on the local and the national. And I'm currently doing research out of Singapore with multinational companies. And what's so striking is the absolute pace of change in the way in which the world is fundamentally changing, and the division of labour within that world is fundamentally changing. And we previously thought that, of course, most of the knowledge work would stay here and the high skill work would stay in places like Britain. But of course, it's not. It's moving elsewhere. One of the key issues here, of course, is cost. And of course, the shipping industry is a fantastic example, the archetypal example, if you like, of what I've been writing about, which is a global auction. Because in terms of the global auction, you think about a global auction for knowledge, you think about prices or salaries increasing. Well, actually, what happens is we've engaged more and more in a reverse auction, where the standards of the jobs, the contracts, the incomes are all in decline. And I think Helen's book does a fantastic job of actually bringing that alive in an everyday sense and everyday context. What she also does in terms of the thinking about a global division of labour is she brings together the detail of the hierarchy of occupations and roles on board ship with, if you like, the ethnic hierarchies of how people from different nationalities holding different passports have different experiences on that ship, have different sense of space and entitlement, which is actually, when you think about it, is very common in lots of other areas of life and work as well. It might not be so spatially concentrated, but nevertheless, it's of a similar order, similar form. And Helen correctly raises the issue and warns us against thinking about transnationalism, as we read in quite a lot of the books on globalization, as being a form of liberation. Well, for some people, it might be a liberation to work in other places beyond the local and the national. But for many others, it's an enforced form of labour and can be a very isolating experience as well as a positive one. And when I read about the officers and the ratings on ships, I also think about the distinction, if you like, between foreign talent and foreign labour, and the way in which foreign talent is treated so differently from foreign labour, in the same way that officers are treated very differently from ratings. Because transnationalism, it looks very different from business class on an Airbus A380 than what it does in the back of a truck going across from Johor to Singapore on a daily basis. So these experiences are what we're seeing is this increasing segmentation of work, isn't it? And segmentation of experience, which is cross-cut by ethnicity and nationality. And Helen does a really good job at really demonstrating how this works in one particular and very important industry. And she does a very good job, I also think, in avoiding one of the problems you get with a lot of ethnographic work, which is to take the narratives of the individuals, which are very interesting, but failing to put that in its appropriate context. And Helen makes a great deal of what she calls the structure of social spaces, and arguing that we need to understand that structuring and the power relations and the employment relations and ethnic relations, etc., which underpin them, in order to make sense of those narratives. And what she also recognises, and what's important in a lot of industrial kind of sociology and economic sociology, is there's our tendency to talk about these people as workers. And actually what these people are human beings doing a job. And they're doing a job very often for other people, whether it be their own family or whatever. But recognising that there is this other person there beyond what they're doing as a job, and how that's constructed around their sense of identity and their sense of belonging and their sense of space, and how those senses of space are actually constructed for these maritime workers. I mean, in Bourdieu's term, I apologise for this in advance, you could talk about fish in water, but also fish out of water at exactly the same time, in terms of being in two places at once, and how that notion of identity is constructed around a sense of a human being with an identity beyond simply work. And Helen's last sentence actually is really about the idea of many of these seafarers engaging in a great act of personal sacrifice. And I'm sure that is the case. And we see this, of course, everywhere, don't we? We see it in terms of Filipino maids, we see it in terms of rural workers in the cities of China, etc. And what it reminds us of course, is the global inequalities which underpin this. And when you think about the rising importance of remittance payments home, then currently what we see is that approximately 325 billion US dollars is sent to developing economies from the developed economies on an annual basis currently, and that migrants would actually make up the 5th largest country in the world. And these issues are not going to go away. They're likely to become more important across a broad range of industries, and having a good sense, therefore, what's going on in the maritime industry and the kinds of regulation and governance issues that it raises, because there's an inherent logic to global capitalism, which we're all familiar with. And those with power will continue to do pretty well, but it is going to have an eroding impact on work for a lot of people, and I think we need to learn from this industry. But there's two final points I'd make, two final observations. One is to ask the question, it's just simply to raise it, about what would an appropriate education and training look like for these maritime workers living in these different worlds that they inhabit. What would that look like? And of course, that's not enough unless you actually examine the underlying power relations and contracts of labour. But nevertheless, it's quite an interesting question. And the other one is that Helen doesn't grapple with, but she can do this from a desk rather than having to go back on board, which is to draw out what are the real policy implications of this. What is it that you really want to communicate to the industry from the book? Because it's all there, but there isn't a chapter on policy, and I just think that this is maybe the next thing that you could perhaps do, is to draw those out clearly for not only for the maritime industry, but actually drawing out those lessons more generally about globalization and the future of work. So this is a key part of the school's kind of activities, and I think it's a great book, and I hope you all read it. Okay, thank you.